are excited to have you join us for the Come Follow Me 2021 podcast and study of the Doctrine and Covenants. Hosted by Rod Meldrum and Jonathan Neville. And presented by Gospel Doctrine Answers. In today's podcast, we will study Doctrine and Covenants 3 through 5. My work shall go forth.
Welcome, everybody. I am so grateful to have the opportunity to share this lesson with you today. We are studying the Doctrine and Covenants sections 3 through 5. And again, the assumption is that you have gone through the Come Follow Me lesson manual and already have kind of gone through these sections. So we're just going to do a little bit of a deep dive into a couple of verses here from the Doctrine and Covenants, and specifically in section 3. This is right after the 116 pages, and so it had been lost. The gift to translate had been lost by Joseph. First, I wanted to start with verse 7. You should not have feared man more than God. Although man might set at naught the counsels of God and despise his words. That is really good counsel for all of us. Do we fear man more than we fear God? Are we willing to stand for what God says, even if it goes against the philosophies of men of our day? And that's seems like it could be should be fairly straightforward, but actually it may be harder than most people think. So, there are so many different things that the scriptures talk about that are quite different than what the philosophies of men are. And that could be things like from the creation of the world to Adam and Eve and them being the first man and woman. Or it could be to Noah's flood, to did we come from lower life forms? Did the Book of Mormon actually happen? I mean, there's all these different things that go about. I think if we stand with God, if we stay with God, then we'll always be on the right path. That's one of the things that we need to be less afraid of how people will look at us if we stand with God, and more willing to stand up for the right, stand up for the things of God. Now, in verse 16, it says here, it says that nevertheless my work, meaning this is the Lord now, this is in Revelation, shall go forth. For inasmuch as the knowledge of a Savior has come into the world through the testimony of the Jews, that's obviously the Bible, even so shall the knowledge of a Savior come unto my people. Now who are his people he's talking about here? Well, it could be his people, meaning the Hebrews. Basically, he was born of Hebrew descent. It could be the Jews. Could be his people are all of the peoples of the earth. So who are the people that Christ is talking to here? Specifically here, he says, and to the Nephites and the Jacobites and the Josephites and the Zoramites through the testimony of their fathers. Where do we find the testimony of their fathers? Well, obviously it's in the Book of Mormon. It says, and also this testimony shall come to the knowledge of the Lamanites and the Lemuelites and the Ishmaelites, who dwindled in unbelief because of the iniquity of their fathers, whom the Lord has suffered to destroy their brethren the Nephites because of their iniquities and their abominations. So because of the Nephite abominations, because the Nephites actually forsook God and turned their backs on him, on this promised land that we call America, because of that, the Lord allowed them to be annihilated, to be basically swept off the land. And that was done through the Lamanites and their posterity. Verse 19 says, and for this very purpose are these plates preserved. Now, which plates is he talking about here? I think he's talking about the gold plates here. The reason why these plates were preserved, he's about to tell us. For this very purpose are these plates preserved, which contain these records, that the promises of the Lord might be fulfilled, which he has made to his people. There have been specific promises that have been made to the Lord's people, and these records were preserved so that those promises and those prophecies would be made known. And it says in verse 20, and that the Lamanites might come to the knowledge of their fathers, that they might know the promises of the Lord concerning them, obviously, and that they may believe the gospel and rely upon the merits of Jesus Christ and be glorified through faith in his name, and that through their repentance they might be saved. Amen. This tells us something really important about the plates, why they were preserved. Why were these plates preserved? So that the prophecies and the promises might be fulfilled, and that the Lamanite remnant might be able to come back to the fold of God, and basically be remembered among the covenant people of God, and return back to Him. If that's the case, then what do you think we take a quick look at what some of these prophecies and these promises are? Because that's really what it's coming down to. So let's take a closer look at what these promises are. Now, some of you may already be aware that a few years ago, I worked with Bruce Porter on a book called Prophecies and Promises. So this has kind of been a major part of my mindset as we've gone through the Book of Mormon information from last year. But also, but this has to do with this revelation here in Section 3 in the Doctrine and Covenants, because it's basically telling us that the purpose for the plates being preserved was so that these promises could be made known, that we would know what they are, and then they could be fulfilled. So let's talk about those promises. So what are exactly the promises that we're talking about here? Well, first off, these are covenant promises and judgments. There's covenants that were made all the way back in Adam's time, or Adam and Eve, and they had a promised land that was promised to them. The promise basically was, as long as you're righteous, you get to remain here. If you become unrighteous, then you're going to be swept off the land. And of course, we get down to Noah's time, and the people around Noah's time basically rejected God. And so God caused Noah to build the ark. He got on the ark, and then the rest of everybody were annihilated basically through Noah's flood. Noah and his family survived. They then began repopulating the earth over in the old world. They went over in Turkey, and then they had descendants and so forth, and they come down to Abraham. Abraham had a promise made by the Lord, basically the Abrahamic covenant. And in that covenant, there were some specific things that were promised. One of those things was a land. In fact, it was called the land of Canaan. And in fact, the original land of promise in Adam and Eve's time was called Canaan as well. And we know that from the scriptures as well. So one of the promises that were actually promised to these to Abraham, and this actually applies to the promised lands. There's only 2 promised lands that were ever actually talked about by Jesus Christ when he was with the Nephites. So these are the 2 promised lands we're going to focus on. But for now, let's just talk about the promises that are in the Book of Mormon that talk about this. So they talked about a land and inheritance that here in Book of Mormon, chapter 5, verses 15 and 19, says, "And also that the seed of his people may more fully believe his gospel, which shall go forth unto them from the Gentiles. For this people shall be scattered." Who are the people he's talking about? He's talking about the Nephites, basically. They're going to be scattered. And this gospel is going to go forth to them from Gentiles. The Lord has reserved their blessings, which they might have received in the land, for the Gentiles who shall possess the land. So because of their wickedness and not following God, the land which was promised to them is going to be given to another people called Gentiles in this passage. And the blessings that they were going to get, meaning the Nephites, are going to be given to this other people, the Gentiles, who are going to possess the land in the future. So they're going to get swept off. They're going to be blessed with posterity. This was part of the covenant, that they were going to be blessed with posterity. They would have seed and descendants and so forth. But in the case of the Nephites, because of their disobedience to God, in 2 Nephi chapter 9, verse 53, it prophesies that there's going to be a remnant found in the promised land in the latter days, but it also prophesies that they're going to be almost completely destroyed. Verse 53 says, "For behold, how great the covenants of the Lord, and how great his condescensions unto the children of men. And because of his greatness and his grace and mercy, he has promised us that our seed shall not utterly be destroyed according to the flesh." Now, if they're not destroyed according to the flesh, I think that means that there's going to be a physical remnant of them that will be remaining, and that he would preserve them, and in future generations they shall become a righteous branch unto the house of Israel. He said the Book of Mormon has a special message for descendants of the Lamanites, a remnant of the house of Israel. And so I call this an ensign for our day, because we have November 2012 and December 2012 had 2 kind of back-to-back articles, one by Elder Larry Echohawk and one by Elder L. Tom Perry, and that have some real implications here as to these prophecies and these promises. This is Elder L. Tom Perry. He gave this talk up at a special devotional fireside up at BYU, Idaho. I think it was February of 2012. And then it took about 8 or 9 months for them to put it into the Ensign, so it came out actually in December of the same year. But this is what he said. He said, "The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is truly a worldwide church. Nevertheless, it's important to realize that the church could never have become what it is today without the birth of a great nation, the United States of America." Now, this is the first time I've ever heard an apostle of the Lord actually come out and say this statement, basically. The United States of America, that's a very specific geographical nation, is being talked about here. He says the United States is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon. Now, if that's the case, then that's really an interesting aspect. So if the United States of America and the promised land in the Book of Mormon are kind of interchangeable here, we're going to have a little exercise here I think you'll find interesting. But basically says it's a place, meaning America, where divine guidance directed inspired men to create the conditions necessary for the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So without America, the restoration of the gospel may not have been able to happen. So he had to have a specific place where enough freedoms were given to the people that they could actually choose to not, for example, follow the king, that basically forced a particular religious dogma upon the people. It says the United States is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon, and so if we just were to make a little change, here's a couple of scriptures that would sound really interesting if you basically just changed out promised land with the United States of America. So here's 1 Nephi chapter 12, verse 1. It says, "It came to pass that the angel said unto me, Look, and behold thy seed, and also the seed of thy brethren. And I looked and beheld the United States," or land of promise, "and I beheld multitudes of people, yea, even as it were in number, as many as the sand of the sea." Think about what nation are they talking about here? I mean, obviously it's talking about the United States, but how well does this actually fit with what we know from history happened here in America? 1 Nephi chapter 13 prophesies that it came to pass that I beheld. This is Nephi, now when he's having these visions. He says, "Many multitudes of the Gentiles upon the United States. And I beheld the wrath of God, that it was upon the seed of my brethren, and they were scattered before the Gentiles and were smitten." And of course we know exactly that's precisely what happened, that they were in fact smitten. The native peoples here, when the Gentiles came over, they were smitten, and they were scattered and nearly destroyed, just as was foretold. 1 Nephi chapter 14, verse 2, "They shall be numbered among the house of Israel, and they shall be blessed people upon the United States forever. They shall be no more brought down into captivity, and the house of Israel shall no more be confounded." Or 2 Nephi chapter 1, verse 5, which says, "We have obtained the United States, the land of promise, a land which is choice above all other lands, a land which the Lord God hath covenanted with me, should be a land for the inheritance of my seed." So God made this covenant with Lehi and his family and Nephi, and that the United States was that land that's choice above all other lands. Interestingly enough, that was the same land as Adam and Eve and their posterity was on when they had the first and original covenant. And 2 Nephi chapter 1, verse 10, it says, "Having been brought by his infinite goodness into this precious United States," or a land of promise, "Behold, I say, if the day shall come, that they will reject the Holy One of Israel, the true Messiah, their Redeemer and their God, behold, the judgments of him that is just shall rest upon them." Brothers and sisters, I want to just reiterate something real important here. Where much has been given, much is required, right? And if that's the case, then if we have a promised land and the people on that land are blessed beyond measure, beyond other lands that are not promised lands, basically, what happens when those people then reject God? The judgments of God come upon them is what happens. And so this is what he's saying here, that the judgments of God will rest upon those that reject him if they have been so blessed to live on this covenant and promised land. Ether chapter 2 is going back all the way to the Jaredites. It says, "Whoso shall possess this United States," land of promise, from that time henceforth and forever should serve him, the true and only God, or they will be swept off when the fullness of his wrath shall come upon them. And that has now happened twice, well, 3 times that we know of. Adam and Eve and their posterity were swept off of this covenant and promised land of God. Then you have the Jaredites came, and then they forgot about God, and then they were swept off. They actually weren't swept off by any other people or a flood. They actually turned on each other and killed themselves from within. And then you have the Nephites that come along later. Nobody comes and drives them off. Their people they fight among each other, and they basically kill each other off, and all the Nephites are wiped out, and the Lamanites are the only ones who remain. That's an interesting pattern for the promised land we call America. What is the first recorded land of promise in Scripture? This is where I mentioned before about Adam and Eve and their posterity. This is coming from the Pearl of Great Price in Moses chapter 6, verse 7. It says, Enos is the grandson of Adam. He lived 90 years, and he begat Canaan. Notice the spelling of Canaan here, C-A-I-N-A-N. That's different than the C-A-N-A-A-N of the Old World over by Jerusalem. It says, and Enos and the residue of the people of God came out of the land called Shulon and dwelt in a land of promise, which he called after his son named Canaan. So the original land of promise was named after Adam's grandson, actually, Canaan. So this is a son of Enos. And where was this land of promise? Well, we know from Doctrine and Covenants section 107, verse 53, which we'll get to later on this year, that 3 years before Adam died, before his death, he called Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, and Methuselah, with the residue of his posterity who were righteous, into the valley called, guess what this is? Adam and Ammon. And there we bestowed upon them his last blessing. So apparently, when Adam and Eve were driven from the Garden of Eden, which we know was somewhere in the Missouri area, basically the heartland of America today, did they leave? Did they go thousands of miles away to some other continent or whatever? It appears that they didn't, because if this is 3 years before his death, Adam lived to be, like 930 years old, so I think he was like 927 years old at the time when he had all of this righteous posterity come, and they had to physically be there so he could place his hands upon their head and give them this blessing. And if that's the case, then they had to physically be in the area of what we know as Adam and Ammon. And do we know where Adam and Ammon is located today? Well, yes, we do. In Doctrine and Covenants section 116, he said that Spring Hill is named by the Lord Adam and Ammon. And then he also says that it's the place called Spring Hill is in Daviess County, Missouri. So this is from the History of the Church, Volume 3, and this is from the 19th of May, 1838. Daviess County, Missouri, and Spring Hill is Adam and Ammon, and we know where those places are at. We know where Missouri is located, we know where Daviess County is, and we even know where Spring Hill is. So this is not in question. This is actually known by revelation and not speculation. The reason why I bring that up is because if that's the case, then we know that Adam and his posterity, they never left the area, which means that the original promised land, named after Adam's great-grandson, Canaan, was right here in the heartland of America today. The reason why I bring this up, folks, is because if we're going to understand the prophecies and the promises and why they're so important in this book, and they're specifically to help to bless the remnant of the Lamanites, so we need to know who these people are, what these prophecies are about, and who these prophecies involve. So there's 4 parts of this covenant that God made with Abraham: the land itself, the land of either Canaan, Adam and Eve, or the Canaan of Abraham. They're going to be blessed with posterity, prosperity, and security. So why does the Lord bless his righteous covenant people while they're on these promised lands with these 3 special blessings? It actually has to do with this one promise made to Abraham. And this is in Genesis chapter 22, verse 18. It says, and in thy seed, Abraham, shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Be blessed with what? Be blessed with the gospel, which are the blessings of life eternal, and that's what he was blessed with. So God is basically making his covenant with Abraham. As long as you and your posterity are righteous, I'm going to bless you with all of these blessings, and the purpose for that is so that you can take my gospel to all the other nations of the earth. And that's the promise. So how many promised lands are there? There's actually only 2 promised lands that were mentioned by Jesus Christ when he was with the Nephites in the Book of Mormon. And so this helps give us a better understanding of who is being spoken of here about these prophecies and these promises. He says in 3 Nephi chapter 20, he says, I will remember the covenant which I made with my people. Who's speaking here? It's the Lord speaking. So he says, so who are his people? Basically the Jews, right? He says, and I have covenanted with them that I would gather them together in my own due time, would give them again the land of their fathers for their inheritance, which is the land of Jerusalem, which is the promised land unto them for how long? Forever, saith the Father. So where's the Book of Mormon's promised land? So if that's the promised land of Christ and his ancestry, basically the Hebrews and down to through the Jews, where's the Book of Mormon's promised land? Well, he actually tells us here in the same chapter here in 3 Nephi. This is again the Lord speaking. He said, behold, this people will I establish in this land. Who's he talking about? He's actually talking about the Gentiles who are going to scatter the remnant of the Nephites. He says, this people, meaning the Gentiles, will I establish in this land unto the fulfilling of the covenant which I made with your father Jacob, and it, meaning this land, shall be a new Jerusalem. So we have Jerusalem and the New Jerusalem. And this is the linking of the Book of Mormon with the lands of the New Jerusalem. So this is also in Ether chapter 13, verses 4 and 6. It says how this is now Moroni actually was the one that's doing the translation of the Jaredite record. And so this is actually kind of a double prophetic witness. You have Ether, who is a prophet, and Moroni, who is a prophet, and they are both now, through Moroni, claiming this. He said, behold, Ether saw the days of Christ, and he spake concerning a new Jerusalem upon this land. Well, what land is Ether and Moroni writing from then? It only makes sense that they are on the land of the New Jerusalem, and that a new Jerusalem shall be built upon this land unto the remnant of the house of the seed of Joseph. So the seed of Joseph is going to have this special land. It's going to be a New Jerusalem, and we know where that New Jerusalem is located. It's basically the same place where Ether and Moroni and the Nephites and Jaredites were located. In fact, did Christ prophesy that the New Jerusalem would be built on Book of Mormon lands? And the answer to that is yes. In 3 Nephi chapter 20 says, this land, it shall be a New Jerusalem. So we know that is part of that. Then Doctrine and Covenants section 57 also tells us this. He says, hearken, saith the Lord your God, in this land, which is the land of Missouri, which is the land which I have appointed and consecrated for the gathering of the saints. Wherefore, this is the land of promise, and the place for the city of Zion. I hate it when the Lord doesn't just tell us and come right out and tell us exactly what he means. But how could he be any more clear in this section of the Doctrine and Covenants when he says, the land of Missouri is the promised land and the place for this city of Zion? Now, the Zion is kind of an interesting thing because there's different ideas about what Zion is. But before we get to that, in Doctrine and Covenants section 84, this is about a year and a half after Joseph Smith received the first revelation about Zion and of where that was going to be, specifically about the New Jerusalem. He receives this revelation in section 84, which we're going to get to again later on this year. It says, it's a revelation of Jesus Christ unto his servant Joseph Smith, to stand upon Mount Zion, which shall be the city of New Jerusalem, which city shall be built beginning at the temple lot, appointed by the finger of the Lord in the western boundaries of the state of Missouri, and dedicated by the hand of Joseph Smith, Jr., where verily this is the word of the Lord, that the city New Jerusalem shall be built by the gathering of the saints, beginning at this place, even the place of the temple. So here we have an understanding that the state of Missouri is a place where the New Jerusalem is going to be built, and that the Lord is the one that actually set that whole thing up. So Missouri, USA is where the New Jerusalem is going to be built. That is scriptural based, and it's unequivocal. It says it straightforward in the scriptures here. Now in section 45 of the Doctrine and Covenants, again we're going to get to this later, it shall be called, it says, and it shall be called the New Jerusalem, a land of peace, a city of refuge, a place of safety for the saints, for the Most High God. And the glory of the Lord shall be there, and the terror of the Lord shall also be there, insomuch that the wicked will not come unto it, and it shall be called Zion. This is the New Jerusalem. When things break down to the point in America where there's no peace, and people will be driven to and fro looking for peace, the only place where there will be peace is going to be in this place called the New Jerusalem, and they're going to call that Zion. So that's also called Zion. And in fact, here in the Pearl of Great Price, and also in the Articles of Faith, number 10, It says in Moses chapter 7, verse 62, "And righteousness will I send down out of heaven, and truth will I cause to sweep the earth as with a flood. And I shall prepare a holy city, for there shall be my tabernacle, and it shall be called Zion, a new Jerusalem." In the Article of Faith number 10, it says, "We believe in the literal gathering of Israel and the restoration of the 10 tribes, that Zion," in parentheses, the new Jerusalem, "will be built upon the American continent." So Missouri, USA is where the New Jerusalem is going to be, and the New Jerusalem is synonymous with Zion in these scriptures. So we know that Missouri, USA is where also Zion is going to be. Now there is an interesting aspect of Zion. People say, well, wait a minute, but Zion can also be just the pure in heart, and that is true. And in fact, here in the Bible Dictionary, I'm going to blow this up a little bit bigger so you can see that. The word Zion is used many times in the Standard Works, and then there's scriptures that go through that. So I've highlighted those here. So there's the pure in heart. There's going to be a temple on Mount Zion. There's going to be a city that's called Zion. It talks about Jackson County, Missouri, being Zion. And then it also talks about, there's other revelations talk about the cause of Zion. And then at the very end of it, it says, in a wider sense, all of North and South America are Zion. Now notice the 3 other ones. Whenever you see green words in my presentations, that's scriptures. But in this particular case, all of these definitions of Zion have a scriptural foundation, except for the last one. There's no scriptural foundation for all of North and South America being Zion. It comes from the History of the Church, Volume 6, pages 318 and 19. And what does that tell us? This is actually an annual conference report by the prophet Joseph Smith that was held on Monday, April the 8th of 1844. And this is real important, folks, because this has been, I think, very much misunderstood, or that people have not really understood this or haven't really analyzed this. But this is a real important point to make. This is Joseph Smith in this annual conference, and basically what he's telling us, he says, a lot of people have been wondering about Zion and what's going to happen and where it's going to be. He says, and I'm now going to tell you. So do you think everybody was on pins and needles and ready to listen to the prophet as he reiterated this? So this is from the History of the Church, Volume 6. It says, you know that there has been great discussion in relation to Zion, where it is, and where the gathering of this dispensation is, in which I am now going to tell you. Okay, everybody's listening, right? Everybody's really paying attention here. He said this, he said, the prophets have spoken and written upon it, but I will make a proclamation that will cover a broader ground. The whole of America is Zion itself, from north to south, and is described by the prophets who declare that it is the Zion where the mountain of the Lord should be, and that it should be in the center of the land. When elders shall take up and examine the old prophecies in the Bible, they will see it. Now let's kind of break this down just a little bit and kind of analyze this, because Joseph Smith's Zion had certain qualifiers associated with it. For example, he said the prophets have spoken and written upon it. Where in the scriptures have any prophets written about North and South America being Zion? There aren't any scriptures that talk about North and South America specifically being Zion. So where is this other Zion? So number 2, he says the whole of America is Zion itself from north to south. Now, the whole of America is Zion. You have to understand a couple things about Joseph Smith here. For example, what does America mean in this context? Well, if you go to Wikipedia, in the English language, it says the Americas, plural, refers to the landmasses of North and South America, whereas America, singular, refers almost exclusively to the United States of America. When people say America from other nations, they pretty much exclusively mean United States of America. When they say Americas with an S, then that could mean all of North and South America. So that's what America means in modern day lingo. But that's not really that important. What's really important is what did America mean to Joseph Smith? Here's a couple of examples of Joseph Smith using the term America in the Evening and Morning Star, December of 1832. He says, the Book of Mormon declares that the land, which is now called America, singular, is a choice land above all others, and we believe it because the Lord has said it, and we have seen it. At present, the world thinks much of America because it is trying the experiment of a free government. Now, brothers and sisters, North and South America at this time were not trying to experiment of a singular free government. That America is only the United States of America that he's talking about here. And he says it's a choice land, and we believe it because we've seen it. He says, and the people of the Lord are beginning to lift up their heads and rejoice. Why? Because Jesus the Redeemer is setting up his kingdom upon this choice land, above all others, and it is no more to be confounded. We shouldn't have any confusion about what nation he's talking about here. This is not talking about Canada and Mexico and Guatemala and Belize and so forth. This is talking about specifically the United States of America, and this is Joseph Smith that wrote this article for the Evening and Morning Star. So when Joseph Smith uses the term America, it's very clear that he's talking about the United States here. He says, in fact, according to an old almanac, the paper states, the curious have observed that the progress of human literature, like the sun, is from east to west. Thus has it traveled through Asia and Europe, and has now arrived at the eastern shore of America. As the celestial light of the gospel was directed here by the finger of God, it will doubtless finally drive the long, long night of heathenish darkness from America. So arts and sciences will change the face of nature in their tour from hence over the Appalachian Mountains to the Western Ocean. Brothers and sisters, where are the Appalachian Mountains located? They're only in the United States of America, right? And he says over to the Western Ocean. So clearly, again, he's talking about America here, and he's talking about the United States because he specifically talked about the Appalachian Mountains and the Western Ocean. So that brings us to the question, well, what did then from north to south mean? Why did he bring up the north to south thing? Well, interestingly enough, in the Doctrine and Covenants in section 87, we're going to get into this later on this year as well. Verses 3 through 4, he talks about, for behold, the southern states shall be divided against the northern states. This was December 25th of 1832. Joseph Smith had already had the revelation about the coming civil war that was going to happen. The Civil War was between the South and the North, the Confederacy and the Union. And Joseph Smith already knew that this was going to happen, prophesied about it, and actually had this revelation written down about this. And so when he talks about America being the United States is Zion, then he said itself from north to south. So is Joseph Smith talking about North and South America here, or is he talking about America's North and South, meaning the Union and the Confederacy? And I think the answer to that is obviously clear. Joseph Smith's America was the United States, and he's talking about the America being divided into the North and the South, which he already had a revelation about. He says it's going to be described by the prophets, when that kind of goes into the number one qualifier here. And number 4, he says it's where the mountain of the Lord should be. So what and where is the mountain of the Lord? Well, we know that from the scriptures as well. This is 2 Nephi chapter 12, verses 2 through 3. It says, and it shall come to pass in the last days, when the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established where? In the top of the mountains. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So the Lord's house, or basically his gospel, his church, is going to be established in the tops of the mountains. Obviously talking about Salt Lake City, Utah. Later on, though, during the millennium, the Zion is going to be in 2 locations, the 2 promised lands. You have Jerusalem, where Christ is going to reign personally upon the earth, and his word will go forth from Jerusalem. And there will be the New Jerusalem, which is here in America, and that will be where his law will go forth. So the law of the world will be basically established from here in America, and the word of the Lord will come forth from Jerusalem, because that's where Christ is going to reign personally. And he'll kind of, as I understand it, he'll go back and forth between those also during the millennium. So then the last qualifier, number 5, is it said it would be in the center of the land. That this Joseph Smith Zion was going to be in the center of the land. Well, Zion is in the center of what land? Well, let's take a look at a couple of possible definitions of what land. If you read in the Doctrine and Covenants section 57 here in verses 1 through 3, we already know that Missouri, USA is where the New Jerusalem is going to be built, and that's the Zion. It's also the land of promise. And according to this scripture here, this land, which is the land of Missouri, wherefore this is the land of promise and the place for the city of Zion. And then it says something really interesting in verse 3. It says, independence is the center place. Now, when Joseph Smith received this revelation, section 57, independence, the United States wasn't as it is today. Okay, It pretty much only went up to about the Mississippi River at that point. And so Independence is right there on the edge of that wilderness, essentially. In fact, if you go beyond Independence, it was pretty much Indian territory back then. So when Joseph Smith received this revelation about Independence being the center place, the center of what? Because it wasn't in the center of anything at that point. It was the far western edge of civilization at that point in time in Joseph Smith's day when he's having these revelations. So I think it's interesting to note that I believe that the Lord knew what the United States would one day become. And so when he said Independence is the center place, is it in the center? Well, actually, technically it is. If you have the United States of America and you put Independence basically as right in there, is that approximately in the center of the land if the land is being defined as the United States? And as it turns out, it actually is. If you go all the way from, it's pretty much the center from north to south. It seems just a little bit to the right of center from east to west. But bottom line is that if the United States is that land, this actually is pretty well centered in the center of that land. So if the United States is the land, is it in the center of it? And I think the answer to that is clearly yes. This is also where the mountain of the Lord's house would be, which is Zion. So there you go. There's that. Okay, but now if you take the entire North and South America approach and say, well, all of North and South America is Zion, the mountain of the Lord, is that in the center of the land? Not even close. It's thousands of miles off. So there's no way that this could be considered as the center, that North and South America can be considered as Zion, North and South America, if Joseph Smith's statement here is correct. Now, unfortunately, there were those who wrote this down and later on took the sayings of Joseph Smith and actually then began to believe that Joseph Smith really meant North and South America, even though it was recorded as all of America, North and South, there's quite a difference there, as you can see. So this is 1 Nephi chapter 13. It says, "Nevertheless, thou beholdest the Gentiles who have gone out of captivity have been lifted up by the power of God above all other nations upon the face of the land which is choice above all other lands." And what land is that? Well, it's the same land that my father was given as a covenant for inheritance. It's a nation above all other nations. And of course, then we know that here's a couple of the other prophecies. I just want to cover these really quickly, and then we're going to wrap up. In 2 Nephi chapter 10, it says, "And this land shall be a land of liberty unto the Gentiles. There will be no kings upon the land." These are all prophecies given by Nephi, basically here in the Book of Mormon. It says, "I will fortify this land against all other nations." That's the security clause. "He that fighteth against Zion shall perish, saith God. For he that raiseth up a king against me shall perish. For I, the Lord, the King of heaven, will be their king." So the Lord also is saying that this nation was going to be basically raised up and be based on his principles and the principles of Christianity. 1 Nephi chapter 13, verse 17 prophesies, and I beheld that the mother Gentiles were gathered together upon the waters and upon the land also to battle against them. Who were these mother Gentiles that battled against these people? Well, you have the British and the French and so forth, and the Spaniards. They all, to some extent, but the mother Gentiles battled against them, and they ended up winning. Right? 1 Nephi chapter 13, verse 19 prophesies, "I, Nephi, beheld the Gentiles that have gone out of captivity were delivered by the power of God out of the hands of all other nations," which means that this was a nation that wasn't going to be part of it's going to be among other nations, which also tells you that it's not all of North and South America, because it's a single nation that is among other nations, and it's going to be delivered by the power of God. Brothers and sisters, is there any indication that the hand of God played a role in the establishment of the United States of America? Basically, almost every founding father testified that it was only through the grace of God and through his divine providence that this nation became what it is. That it actually was delivered by the power of God out of the hands of not just one, but basically all of the other nations. I mean, we have this ragtag group of people and this clinging to existence on this eastern seaboard of this gigantic continent. And they went up, not against just one or two, but basically all of the superpowers of their day, and won. The statistical possibility of that, or the statistical probability of that, is almost nothing. It shouldn't have happened. It was only because of divine providence that did in fact happen. Now, the Constitution of the United States was something that was also unique to the United States and has blessed the peoples all over the earth for many, many years now. And that the Lord is the one that actually takes credit for the Constitution in Doctrine and Covenants section 101, verse 80, when he says in Revelation, "For this very purpose have I," meaning the Lord, "established the Constitution of this land by the hands of wise men whom I, the Lord, raised up for this very purpose." So the Lord raised up specific individuals. As far as I know, this is the first time in all of world history that the Lord claimed that he raised up specific individuals for the purpose of establishing a government system. And that was all under the Constitution of the United States. This is the Constitution of the United States here, and in the preamble of the Constitution is written this. Now, if you remember the four parts of the covenant, basically the four blessings of the covenant involve a land, posterity, prosperity, and security. See if you can find those four elements embedded into the preamble of the Constitution of the United States, when it says, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Did you notice the four parts of the covenant are all in there? The land, posterity, prosperity, security, and they sought these blessings by an ordination. And what is an ordination? It's a two-way contract between man and God. So this is a contract, basically. Was this document inspired? Well, according to the Lord, he was the one that actually set up the people. But here in 2 Nephi chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "Wherefore this land is consecrated unto him whom he shall bring. And if it so be that they shall serve him according to the commandments which he has given, it shall be a land of liberty unto them." Now that's interesting, because 8 times in the Book of Mormon, the prophet Mormon, in his abridgment, he refers to this land as a land of liberty. "Wherefore they shall never be brought down into captivity. If so, it shall be because of iniquity. Because if iniquity shall abound, cursed shall be the land for their sakes. But unto the righteous it shall be blessed forever." Because this has always been a promised land, all the way from Adam and Eve and their posterity, all the way down through to today. 2 Nephi chapter 1, verse 9 says, "Wherefore I, Lehi, have obtained a promise." And this is the promise, folks, that we need to know about. "That inasmuch as those whom the Lord God shall bring out of the land of Jerusalem shall keep his commandments, they will prosper upon the face of this land. And they shall be kept from all other nations, that they may possess this land unto themselves. And if it so be that they shall keep his commandments, they shall be blessed upon the face of this land. And there will be no one to molest them, nor to take away the land of their inheritance, and they shall dwell safely forever." But what is the obligation that is associated with this covenant then, folks? It's the 10 Commandments. And how are we doing as a nation today at living the 10 Commandments? How well are we doing about not making any graven images, or taking the name of the Lord thy God in vain, or remembering the Sabbath day and keeping it holy, or committing adultery, or stealing, or killing, or bearing false witness? We've actually had an assault on these 10 Commandments throughout our nation through activist judges and so forth to take these things and have them removed from all public life in America. So what happens as long as we are keeping the commandments? 2 Nephi prophesies, "As long as we serve him according to the commandments which he has given, it shall be a land of liberty unto them, wherefore they shall never be brought into captivity." If the United States of America is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon, then brothers and sisters, that tells us a lot about this revelation. And coming back to section 3 in the Doctrine and Covenants, basically that the very purpose, the very reason for these plates to be preserved, according to the revelation here in section 3, is so that the prophecies and the promises that are in it can be understood, that they will be fulfilled, and that the Lord's covenant people, the Lamanites remnant, will come to the knowledge of their forefathers and come back to the fold of God. That's a really important thing, because most of us have been taught and believe, and it's true, that the purpose of these plates was a second witness of Jesus Christ. And while that is definitely true, that is definitely the case, it's interesting that that's not the thing that the Lord told Joseph Smith in this revelation why the plates were preserved. He said it was because of these prophecies and promises. So I want to just give you a couple of ideas if you would like to study this a little bit more in your mind, and do a little more of a deep dive. I suggest you can get the book. It's called Prophecies and Promises, the Heartland Model, the Book of Mormon, and the United States of America. In this, we have this is a listing of 36 very specific prophecies and promises that are in the Book of Mormon about a latter-day nation, a latter-day land, basically. So, for example, 33 times it talks about it being a land of promise. 20 times it says it would be a land obtained and consecrated for an inheritance. 14 times the Book of Mormon says it would be a land that's choice and precious above all other lands. It will be cursed because of wickedness. It will be consecrated and holy to those led to it by the Lord. It will be a land of prosperity and security. It will be called the land of liberty. The New Jerusalem is going to be built on this land. What nation are they talking about here? What nation best fulfills all of these prophecies and promises that are in the Book of Mormon? As you go through these and you study these out in your mind, you will find that the only nation that can qualify for all 36 of these prophecies and these promises that are in the Book of Mormon is the United States of America. And that tells us some really, last but not least, and that there's places there you can find the information there in that. And then also, many of you also have Exploring the Book of Mormon, America's Heartland, or you can get this in the bookstore if you don't already have that. But on page 14, it tells just a couple of these prophecies and promises here, about the Gentile nations and so forth. It also has the listing of the 36 prophecies and promises. There's 18 prophecies regarding the land itself, and then there's also 18 other prophecies about the people who are going to occupy this sacred land. And then it also talks about that some of the prophecies has talked about it be a new nation, it would be a free people, it'd be a chosen nation and a land of promise, it'd be a land of liberty. And I have this last couple of statements here. Because of the times that we are in politically, I think that this hopefully will be a little bit of a comfort for all of you as we contemplate our nation and what's going on in it today. This is President Harold B. Lee, in his book called the Writings of Harold B. Lee. He said, "Ye are the light of the world." These are 4 quotes I just wanted to share with you. This is the cradle of humanity, where life on this earth began in the Garden of Eden. Again, talking and referring to Adam and Eve here. This is the place where the New Jerusalem is, and this is the place where the Savior will come to his temple. And that, of course, was in Kirtland, Ohio, the first temple of this dispensation. He goes on to say, he says, "This church is one of the most powerful agencies for good in all the world, and we must all sound with one voice. We must tell the world how we feel about this land and this nation." The importance of the United States of America, I think, is really critical here, and unfortunately, we've had our educational systems have been downplaying the role and the importance of America in the world, as secular forces have taken over much of our educational systems. He says, this is President Harold B. Lee, says, "I have faith in America. You and I must have faith in America if we understand the teachings of the gospel of Jesus Christ." Of course, the corollary to that is if we don't have faith in America, folks, then we don't understand the gospel. Because America plays a foundational and pivotal role in all of God's entire plan of salvation for all of his children. You can't really have a people who are going to become like God if they don't have the ability to freely make choices like God makes. If other people make the choices for you, which was Satan's plan, then basically that will be a major problem for people to be able to become like he is. Then President Harold B. Lee then finishes up, he says, "I plead with you not to preach pessimism." We could use some of that today, right? I preach that this is the greatest country in all the world. This is the favored land. This is the land of our forefathers. It is the nation that will stand despite whatever trials or crises it may yet have to pass through. I don't know what trials and crises that President Harold B. Lee was foreseeing in this particular case, but basically what he's saying is that the nation will stand. Brothers and sisters, as we contemplate the things that have been going on around us, just remember that God is in control. God has established this nation from the very foundations of the world, and it continues on through this through all these different civilizations that have been on this sacred land. Today is occupied basically by the nation called the United States of America. It is a special land. It's a special nation. It's where the gospel was restored and where the missionary force goes out. This is where the headquarters of the church is, and it will continue to play a vital role even into the millennium. So, brothers and sisters, just remember this, and that is that. Don't want to go to that one. I've switched there.
So, brothers and sisters, remember this.
So, brothers and sisters, just remember this: America is a promised land. This is a sacred place. The scriptures, the Doctrine and Covenants, actually tell us that the purpose of these plates was so that we can know who the right people are and where these promises apply. If we don't at least know what nation and which people these promises apply to, then what would be the purpose of all of the prophesying that was being done here by Mormon Moroni in the gold plates? I hope that this is helpful as you continue to study and contemplate the Doctrine and Covenants this year. Thanks for joining us, brothers and sisters, and I hope that you'll join us again next week. We have Jonathan Neville is going to be up again, and we're going to be talking about Doctrine and Covenants sections 6 through 9, the translation process. I think you're going to find that absolutely fascinating. So join us, and we'll see you next week.
To me, this is not just another nation. It is not just one of the family of nations. This is a nation with a great mission to perform for the benefit of liberty-loving people everywhere. It is my firm conviction that the Constitution of this land was established by men whom the God of heaven raised up unto that very purpose. This is part of my religious faith.
Get the very latest edition of the Annotated Book of Mormon available now in the bookstore at bookofmormonevidence.org.